Gabriel, were you there? I think I saw you there.
I'm here.
Uh-huh. So I'll do your introduction if you like.
Sure.
Okay, Gabriel Rymberg. Gabriel has been practicing yoga and meditation for over a decade. Today's presentation is intended as an informal introduction to mindfulness inspired by the teachings of Eckhart Tolle, author of the book Power of Now. This book has changed Gabriel's life and for the better. Over to you, Gabriel. Thank you.
Thank you. The book really did change my life. I read it about 12, 13 years ago, and I didn't understand a thing. It took many years so that the concepts would sink in and that I could say that it's really something that is my personal experience. And all of this presentation really is me sharing my personal experience. So if I speak in the we or you or us, I really mean me or I, and sometimes the words will say we or you, but I really mean me. And I am really trying to share my personal experience. And the invitation is for you to find out if any of the things that I'm saying that I found out that are true about me and Eckhart found out that are true about him are also true about you. So it's really an invitation to look inside and find out what is true for each and every one of us. So I'll start by saying that I'm crazy, but there is hope. And why am I saying that I'm crazy? And let me start with a story. And this story is indeed taken from Eckhart's teachings. And he says that one morning he was in the tube in London going to university. He actually studied there for several years before he became a spiritual teacher. And he was in this very crowded tube underground metro train. And people were standing up. This was pre-coronavirus times, so people were still taking the tubes. And it was very crowded. It was rush hour in the morning. So there was a lot of people there. And at the edge of the tube, there was 2 empty seats that nobody wanted to sit in. The reason was quite evident. There was a lady there sitting, and she was screaming at the top of her lungs at nobody in particular. She was looking to her right, to the empty seat to the right and to the left, and she was talking to somebody who wasn't there, fighting with somebody, being very angry and accusing them of doing something. And everybody else was looking at this, not understanding what was going on. And she just kept going and going and going. And obviously nobody wanted to sit close to her. But people were watching and obviously not understanding. And she was just going on as if nothing was happening, as if she didn't care, or she wasn't even aware that she was doing something that was quite weird. And Eckhart was looking at her, and when her station came up, she just got up and left and started climbing up to the street level. And he went after her simply because he was curious, but also this was his station. So he walks about, I don't know, 10 paces behind this lady in the street in London in the morning, and she keeps fighting with nobody. So she keeps screaming and yelling and fighting and expressing her anger, walking down the street, and people are looking at her. Of course, everybody's queasy about this. And so she keeps going, and Eckhart is behind her. And then she goes in front of the university main tower, which incidentally was featured in the George Orwell film 1984 as the institution. So she goes into this building, and this is also where he has to go. So he goes behind her, and all of this time she's yelling and screaming. And then she gets lost in the crowd, and he doesn't see her anymore. And before he goes into lecture, he goes into the toilet, and is finishing after the toilet, and he's washing his hands in front of the mirror, and his mind says, you know, this lady is probably really lost it. She's really crazy. And there was a gentleman standing right by Eckhart. And this gentleman just turns around and looks at Eckhart, very weird. And Eckhart really understood that at that moment, he wasn't thinking that this lady is crazy. He was actually saying it out loud. So the gentleman right beside him didn't know what he was talking about. And he turned around and says, what's going on? You know, what's wrong with you? And this gentleman leaves, and Eckhart is alone in the toilet, and he starts laughing, a little bit nervous, because he really understands at that moment that there is no real difference between him and this lady. The difference is in variation, because she was obviously doing it all the time out loud, expressing her mind without caring about other people. And he was most of the time doing it inside his head. And this one time he actually said it out loud, but it's really the same phenomenon. So he understood for himself that if this lady is really crazy by our standards, you know, she's not well, the way we see normal, she's not normal, then what does it make of me? And now I'm by extension saying, okay, what does it make of me, Gabriel, which also have this monkey mind connecting to the previous lecture by Sandra. My mind is also all the time thinking, producing thoughts. And that's why I'm saying I'm also crazy. So if that is true, then, okay, what do we do from here? And where's the hope? And the invitation here is, okay, take a look at yourselves and see what's going on with you. Do you also have this dialogue? Do you also have this incessant train of thought inside your head? Of course, the details will vary. You know, we don't always fight. We may be worried or happy or concerned or bored or whatever. So there might be other people in my dialogue. I like to call it a movie. Like there's a movie inside my head. So sometimes I see pictures, sometimes I see voices, I hear voices, which might be my own or some other people, or sometimes I have thoughts. These are different qualities of the same phenomenon, which I call the obsessive train of thought inside of my head. So I'm going to start by asking us to be quiet for 60 seconds. I'm going to put a timer, and I'm going to hit the gong, and I'm going to ask you to stop everything you're doing, and for 60 seconds, just pay attention to what is going inside your head. And there's 4 types of things we can pay attention for. The first thing is voices. We might hear sounds inside our head, which are words, basically. So this is the first thing we can pay attention to. Are there words or thoughts in the form of words coming inside our heads? Some of us are more visual than others. So we might actually, when we close our eyes, see a picture, like an internal movie of either what is going on right now. You know, each and every one of us is sitting in a different location, or something that happened an hour ago, or something that we envision that will happen tomorrow. So there might be a picture. So that's the second thing we can pay attention to. And then there's 2 more things that usually come up. The third is sensations. So we're sitting on a chair, most of us. So the sensation of our buttocks touching the chair, or our back leaning towards the back, or our hands placed on our knees, or the fabric of the clothes touching our body, or the heat or the cold or the wind, or anything that has to do with a physical sensation. That's the third thing we can pay attention to. And the fourth is emotions. This guy has been chatting all day long and I'm bored. You know, sometimes I give this lecture to teenagers. So I tell them, you know, pay attention if your mind is telling you, oh, I'm so bored. I really want this lecture to be over. And who is this older guy? These are 15, 16, 17-year-olds. So a 50-year-old is really grandpa. So who's this older guy who's, you know, coming here to kick our brain? And so these are boredom, or maybe, you know, I'd like to be somewhere else, or angry or tired or whatever. So these are types of emotions we can pay attention to. So we said like voices, pictures, physical sensations, and emotions. 60 seconds is quite a long time. And if it's available to you, then I would encourage you to close your eyes. And I'll hit the gong, we'll be in silence, and then I'll hit the gong again when the 60 seconds are over. So that was 60 seconds. Is there anybody who would like to share what they felt, saw, heard? So please turn on your mic, and if you'd like to share, just start talking. And
well, I heard my thoughts coming in subvocally, and then had a sensation in my foot toward the end of it, you know, a little bit of a sharp sensation, and not really anything in the way of pictures. Nothing
thank you,
definite anyway.
Anyone else?
By the way, it was dialogic.
Okay. Philip?
Yeah, so I was hearing the tinnitus in my ear for a while, and then my thoughts just began to sort of wander aimlessly into random strange things. And I think I was thinking about walking through bushes or something, nowhere in particular. But yeah, my tinnitus initially started it.
Wow, thank you. So I really like to take it to the next step and say that the reason I'm saying this is some type of craziness is because, like Sandra was sharing before, much of the time, many of us, and this is my experience, are led to act or react, or our body actually produces the reaction based on our thinking pattern. So if these thoughts just happen, and they happen all the time, and our body is reacting to them, and we are in this type of automatic pilot mode that really controls our lives. And the thing is, if there is a remote that we can turn this off, then we really have to find it for ourselves and start to learn how to use it. And I'm saying if, because some people say, yeah, I can turn my mind off, I can turn my thoughts off, and I can be completely silent. Some others experience that this is not really the case for them. So it's really a very personal experience. But why is it important? because if those thoughts keep going and going and going, and we don't have we as conscious beings, as beings with choice, cannot really control them, and we're acting upon them, then this really is a very serious matter, because all of our actions in this world are basically coming from something we don't control. Much of the time we don't understand this, and maybe we are not aware of it. So this is why this is an important topic to bring into our awareness. What I'd like to do now is give you, basically all of us, a challenge. I'm saying, do we have a remote control? Can we, at will, shut off our monkey mind and be in complete peace and silence? In a sense, just put ourselves in a very relaxed, non-thought mode. So the challenge that I give you is this. We're going to sit for another 30 seconds. I'm going to put the gong and put the timer for 30 seconds. And in those 30 seconds, if you do know where your remote control is for your thoughts, please press the off button. And if you don't, then try to find if you do have an off button. I mean, try to experiment with whatever you feel is the proper way to try and turn off the stream of thoughts. This is the challenge. So basically, it's an experiment. We don't know what the results are going to be. So again, if you do have a way to shut off your obsessive train of thoughts, then please do so. And then I'll ask you to share your trick with us. And if you don't, then just try to do it and see what happens. So we'll do it for 30 seconds. And I'm going to start the timer right now. So I'd like to ask you a simple question, and you can just raise your hand. Who amongst you was able to turn off the thoughts at will? Okay. So Andre is half-half. I can say that I'm half-half going down. So I did this with many other audiences, and sometimes some of the kids, some of the teenagers come up with surprising suggestions, things that they experienced or they tried. And invariably, most of the people who report that they have some ability, basically what they say is that they practice some kind of concentration technique. They try to blank their mind by concentrating on something. This again connects to Sandra's discussion. So that's something for me could be right now the gong. I was just trying to pay my attention to the sound of the gong, and that's why I didn't stop it. It was going for almost 30 seconds. And it was just fading slowly. Some people just imagine a curtain, a black curtain, and then you focus on this black curtain, and then eventually the mind quiets down. This is a known phenomenon. So there are some type of tricks that you can do to do it. But again, it takes practice and it takes some awareness. It takes awareness for you to find out that your mind is now being in monkey mind. It takes a choice to say, okay, now I'm going to try to quiet my mind a little bit. And then it takes knowledge to know what you're practicing, and then practice to actually do it. And the results vary. I mean, it's possible, but it takes commitment to do this. Um, I want to now take the next step and connect it to a much larger picture. And this is also taken from Eckhart's Tolle, The Power of Now book. So this is his observations. I'm paraphrasing a little bit with my own understanding and insights, but I quite agree with what he's saying. And now I'm connecting this phenomenon that we experienced to the world that we live in and create. He says that basically this obsessive train of thought, Eckhart, is what produces our ego. I know that most of you heard this word. I'm not going to go deeper into the definition of what it is or what it isn't. This is a very loose, informal introduction. But what Eckhart Tolle says, and I think I agree with him, is that this construct that we call an ego is basically formed and sustained by this incessant train of thought. And what is important is that whatever we create outside by our actions, which is basically derived from our thoughts, and by extension, in this argument, by this incessant train, obsessive train of thought, is basically the world that we see. So just to give it a very simple example, if I feel now anger towards Sandra, who's sitting now to my left, and this is what, or I might be feeling anger and Sandra is the person that is just happening to be there, and then I express my anger and I say very nasty things to her, this now is creating a situation with me and another person. So if I cannot control my anger and I express it, because I don't have a choice, it's really something automatic, then now I hurt another person, and that has repercussions. This other person might spend half of her day being hurt about something I said, and then she might meet another person and, you know, get that chain going. So there's ripples around us by virtue of the fact that the thoughts that we produce and the actions that we produce touch other people and create the reality around us. And if we look at the world that we live in, and I'm now putting on the side the coronavirus phenomenon because I don't want to go into that right now, but this is what's happening. This is why we're convening today. But let's put that on the side and look back a little bit to the 20th century. If we look at humanity as a human being, we would commit that human being to a psychiatric ward, because in the 20th century, humans have killed each other en masse. There were 2 world wars. There was ethnic cleansing in Africa, in Bosnia. There was the Holocaust. The Armenians were exterminated. You name it. Stalin killed millions of his people. In Vietnam, there was a dictator. Put on top of that all the murders and the rapes and the horrible way that humans treat each other on an individual level and collectively. Put on top of that the way we rape Mother Earth and we pillage and we consume our way into oblivion. And science is quite specific about the fact that the climate change phenomenon we're seeing is man-made. So we're polluting the oceans, we're cutting down trees so that cows can graze, and we can put soybeans there so that we can consume them. And I'm not saying if this is good or bad. I'm not judging. These are just facts. This is what we're doing. And if a person would do all these things on an individual basis, in most societies, this person would be committed as a crazy person. So the argument is, the world we're creating is a crazy place. And we are creating it individually and collectively. So that's why I think if we put whatever is happening inside of us individually and we externalize it and see the results collectively that we're creating, this is why it's important that we actually go back to sanity. And the question is, how can we do that? Or what is available for us become a little bit more sane and a little bit more advanced. And And one of the portals that Eckhart Tolle talks about is basically the now. And one of the portals into the now, into the present moment, is the physical body. So what I invite you to do now is, if you're with us, you can take a 1-minute break or a little bit longer. Get up and get yourself a small article of food, like a raisin or a nut or something small that you can hold in your hand. And we will do a conscious eating exercise. So I'm going to take a little cranberry like this, and I invite you to get up and go to your kitchen and get something small that you can nibble. It will also keep you awake if you're struggling with sleep. And we'll wait for you for 1 minute, and then we'll start doing this conscious eating exercise, which is basically a way to connect to our body, and through this portal of our body, connect to the present moment. So I'll wait for you to come back. Perfect. Okay, so what I invite you to do is put the raisin or nut or whatever it is on your palm, and let's do this exercise as if we're really like a small child, like a beginner's mind, like Sandra said. So think of it as, I have an object on my palm that I've never seen before. So let's take the opportunity to connect to this object and eat it in a certain very conscious way. So the first thing we do is, I don't know what this is, so I'm looking at it. I'm experiencing the color, the reflection of the light on the surface. Some of it is shiny. My cranberry is shiny. It's got a very peculiar shape. Some of it is round and there's some indentations in it. So I look at it. And of course, I don't know what this is, so I'm curious. And I have this curiosity. Now I take my fingers and I hold it in my hand and I start to touch it and feel, for instance, that it's sticky. It might be cold or warm or room temperature. It might be, it might have some texture to it. Now I can smell it. I can put it close to my nose and smell. Maybe it's got some sweetness or tartness or no smell at all. Okay, so I can use all of my senses to connect to this object even before I actually eat it. And then we'll put it in our mouth, but we're not going to chew it yet. So I want you to, for instance, now that I'm thinking I'm going to put this in my mouth, my saliva is already starting to work. My mouth is already filling with saliva. So I put it in my mouth and I let the saliva go around it. I'm being a bit graphic, but you can imagine. And now I can just let it be in my mouth and start to taste if it's sweet, if it's sour. I can put my tongue around it and feel it with my tongue. The tongue is a very sensitive organ. Then I can take a small bite and let whatever juices come out of this little piece of food. Okay, so now I have some juice in my mouth. And I can swallow the juice and feel the saliva going down my esophagus to the stomach. And now I can start chewing very slowly and feeling the texture change and other flavors coming out. And even before we swallow, we can just pay attention to our intention to swallow this. And maybe even pay attention to how it feels inside our stomach, if we can feel it or imagine it. So now I swallowed it and I try to feel like how it is inside. The purpose of this exercise is twofold. First of all, to show that we can connect to the present moment by doing anything. Chopping carrots, like Gary said before. Or like the Zen monks used to say, you know, chop wood, carry water. They get to be enlightened by chopping wood and carrying water. How is that? Because there's a whole philosophy of what you do while you're carrying wood and chopping wood and carrying water. That is really your practice. So eating or cooking or whatever can be used to connect to the present moment. And what I want, the other part of why this exercise is important is that when I was talking to you and guiding you through it, and asking you to look at the little piece of food and touch it and smell it and feel it inside your mouth, most probably, and you can witness that for yourself, your mind wasn't busy doing something else. You were not thinking about your next meal or your next sleep or whatever. Your mind was busy doing that exactly. It was engaged in that activity. So it wasn't, you were not now a slave to whatever obsessive train of thought that usually is our usual state. It was stopped. It was cut through because our attention was on something specific. And this is exactly how meditation works. Our mind naturally wanders around. We call this the monkey mind. And this is like an uncontrollable process. We cannot really control it. I mean, we might have the remote, but the trick with the remote is just put the attention on something else. And we can choose what we put the attention on. So if we're chopping carrots, we can choose to put the attention on how we hold the knife, look at the carrot, appreciate the color, appreciate the smell that comes out when we're cooking, make an intention that this food is going to nourish ourselves and other beings, cook with love. You know how it is when you go to a restaurant and the food looks delicious, but when you taste it, it doesn't taste very good. And I usually tell to the people that I'm dining with is probably the person who cooked is not really mindful to cooking with love. So the food can look amazing, but it will not taste that well. And you can go to another place and the food looks okay, but when you taste it, you feel nourished. You feel there's other qualities coming from that food. So we can cook with intention, or you can do anything with intention. And that has the added benefit of us being freed from this obsessive train of thought that really drives us and creates the world at large that we don't like. So I'm connecting the small things that we do as a portal to being present in the present moment as a way for us to actually be mindful of what we're doing and create the reality that we want to create because we're conscious of what we're doing. So this is basically the gist of what Eckhart Tolle talks about. Is he takes it to the next level and actually says, and this is more like a spiritual teaching now, that the essence of who we are is basically that which is observing things. We are not that train of thoughts. We are not our patterns. We are not our conditioning from our parents or our forebears. We are the ones, the awareness that is watching. Of course, if you take it from the Urantia book, there's many other levels of who we are and what we are. And I'm not going to go there right now because this is a whole different topic. And I don't think I'm specifically qualified to talk about this. But if you look at the awareness of who we are and say that this is more our essence, then connecting to that quality of who we are and acting from that quality is more like a divine realization of who we are. And this is the power of now, because when we are in the now, we let ourselves be driven by these higher aspects of ourselves, the thought adjuster, the spiritual influences around us, and not by our animalistic conditioning or human conditioning that we all have, which is driving this incessant train of thought. So in a sense, chopping carrots in a conscious way is the way for the Father to work through us. And if we practice chopping carrots in a conscious way and we make it like a habit, then when we are facing other types of decisions in our lives, we will be more connected to our Father. There will be more of a chance for us to actually be a channel for the divine will. And the voice, the little voice, still voice inside that speaks very softly, which is the voice of God inside of us, will have a chance to manifest itself, and we'll be actually able to hear it, because otherwise it drowns in the big voices of all the other things that we hear inside and feel. So basically, this is why this is important. It's a very practical way to use our daily life to realize our supreme purpose on this planet. The way I see it is basically learn to be more like God, and every day it's a practice that we go that way. So this is basically what I wanted to talk about. Connected all to the Urantia book in a very loose way, and to say that this practice of mindfulness is a whole world unto itself, and you can learn many techniques, but it can be something very simple. And we can right now sit on a chair, and like I'm doing right now, I'm talking to you, but I'm putting my awareness into how it feels to sit on the chair. What is the posture of my body? How it feels for me to touch my legs because my hands are on my knees, etc. It's always available to us, our physical body and our breath, which are very basic mindfulness techniques. So the power of now is really very important, and cultivating some kind of a practice is important. I usually end this presentation by talking to the youngsters that I talk to and asking them or suggesting to them to make a commitment. Choose one activity that you do every day, like, brushing your teeth or drinking a cup of water, and decide that for the next 7 days, or if you want the next 21 days or 49 days, you will be conscious of drinking that cup of water every time you drink a cup of water. So you make a commitment that you're going to practice this, which means when you take now a cup of water, you do this, and you're going to drink, like we ate the raisin or whatever, is now you feel the cup, you look at the water, you take a sip, and you feel the temperature, etc. And you can take a minute to do this. And this will be like an anchoring habit that you create to be mindful in a very daily activity. So thank you, Andre, for practicing right away. And this is a very practical thing that anybody can do. It's available, regardless of whatever you believe in or whatever you practice. This is not a spiritually advanced practice that you have to devote 30 minutes to. Of course, this is a very good idea, but many people don't find that accessible. So it could be either drinking a cup of water, brushing your teeth, before you go to bed, any type of ritual that we do every day and that we can utilize to become more aware, more mindful to what we're doing. And so this is basically the presentation about the power of now, and now I can open up to questions or sharing or whatever you would like to do.
Gabriel, can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's Brian Sikorsky.
Hi, Brian.
Hi. I don't know if I should put my video on, but just wondering, like, what is the best time of day to be doing this? Like, first thing in the morning, last thing at night? I mean, could I do this my coffee in the morning? Just turn everything else off, because I have a habit every morning of coffee, watch the news, all kinds of morning stimulus. But I just tried your exercise I had a jujube or something, and I was experiencing it the way you were saying it, and it was interesting. But maybe I could do that with my cup of coffee in the morning.
Yeah, you can do it with your cup of coffee. I just would suggest that you do 1 minute of this exercise with a cup of coffee, and then you drink your coffee with your paper or whatever other stimulus you have. So when you're doing this mindfulness exercise, just drink the coffee. Like
Yes.
you could say,
Nothing else.
Yeah, just drink the coffee. So you're smelling the coffee, you're looking at the coffee, you're feeling how the cup is in your hand. You start to sip the coffee and you feel the temperature of your mouth rising and the texture and the bitterness and the sweetness. And then the coffee goes down your esophagus. So your esophagus becomes warm, and then your stomach becomes warm. And you can take this and just, teach yourself to go through this experience very, very slowly. And, just put a timer for a minute or two and decide that for that 2 minutes, while you're drinking your coffee, you're just drinking your coffee. And that will be your anchor. And you can do that every time you drink your coffee. And you can do this even when you're with other people. Let's say you're with your spouse and you're drinking your coffee. You can still listen to your spouse talking and feel how the coffee mug in your hand, I'm listening right now to myself talking, and at the same time I pay attention to how my fingers are holding the cup. It's as simple as that. When you do that, you break that obsessive train of thought, because you're not thinking about YouTube when you're holding a cup and you're paying attention to how the cup is held in your hand. The simple reason is that, in my experience, I cannot think about two things at the same time. The mind is not multitasking. I mean, there's a subconscious mind that is doing a lot of things, but our conscious mind is able to pay attention to one thing at a time consciously. And that's the faculty that we're utilizing here to train the prefrontal cortex, as Sandra was saying, to make it larger and to give it more practice, so that when the amygdala is firing up and when we are starting to be controlled by conditioning, animalistic, or our programming, then the prefrontal cortex can actually say, no, okay, I can pay attention to all of this, but I'm aware of what's going on right now. And then I can choose. Then we have the freedom to choose. So yeah, cup of coffee. I used to do it with brushing my teeth. Now I have like a little prayer on the mirror when I brush my teeth. I read that prayer. But any chance that you have of an activity, I think what counts here is a decision and a commitment to say, I'm going to do this 7 days, 14 days, 21 days. Every time I pick up a cup of coffee in the morning, I'm going to spend 1 minute doing this. And even if you forget, the next day, just do it. Persistence over time is really what creates a habit, a new habit.
I have one more question too, since no one else is asking. You mentioned that the monkey mind, was kind of the origin of people's egos, something like that. Can you explain that again?
Well, I said that, and this is not my teaching. I'm just paraphrasing Eckhart Tolle. And if you want to read more about this and understand what he's saying, which I cannot represent very accurately because it's his teaching, there's two books that I would recommend: The Power of Now and The New Earth. I'm going to try to paraphrase things that he says, which I believe are true, but it's really not a formal teaching. He says that the phenomenon of the monkey mind, the mind that jumps from thought to thought and that obsessively thinks all the time, is something that we witness. We witness it on our experience. But what he says is, because of this happening, there's a construct called the ego, which is basically the sum of all of our thoughts and actions and memories. And this ego, which is like a psychic construct, seems to have a reality of its own. The more advanced teachings in the East and in other traditions basically say this ego is an illusion. But that's a much more advanced teaching, and I really cannot explain this very shortly right now. But what Eckhart is saying is the ego is sustained. It continues to be there and seem to be real, so to speak, because we have this train of thought, because we're continuously monkey minding. And what I gave you as a suggestion, as an exercise with a raisin or with a cup of coffee, is basically a way to stop or to break that pattern of obsessive thought, which in a sense, it really breaks the ego and dissolves it in a way. Because when you're
Really helpful for
eating
me.
a raisin, you're not thinking about last year or whatever your whatever it is that your ego is busy with up to the moment where you started doing something consciously. That's the phenomenon I wanted to let you experience, is that if you're cutting carrots or eating a raisin or drinking coffee and you're doing just that, you basically disappear. There's no more Brian at that moment. It's just you eating a carrot or chopping a carrot or drinking coffee, and the rest of Brian with all of this complexity for that moment doesn't really exist. This is what people sometimes call the flow. A high performance skater or an Olympic athlete that trains for many, many, many hours and then actually goes and performs, does a dash or ice skating or swimming. They report that when they're doing this, they're not thinking, they're just acting in a conscious way, sometimes less conscious way. But their ego is somehow not existent at that time. And of course, after you're done, it comes back. So when you start thinking again compulsively, all of a sudden, everything that you left behind for 30 seconds or 1 minute when you were doing something consciously comes back. So you're saying, okay, it's back. And that's fine. But when we practice putting ourselves in that mode again of doing something consciously, we're slowly breaking this pattern of the ego taking over us and running our lives, which in extension creates the world that we see outside. So those little breaks, they start to accumulate. And if you practice them long enough, then you become more and more aware. And with this awareness comes the ability to choose. What is your response going to be? That's the importance of this practice. Why is it important?
I mean,
Gabriel?
thank you.
Yeah.
I know we've got little time left. Can you hear me okay?
I'm sorry?
Can you hear me okay? This is Julian.
Yes, Julian, I can hear you.
Look, I know you've only got a few minutes left. I just want to thank you for the presentation. It's been excellent. I'm a clinical psychologist, so everything you're talking about is relevant to me and my clients. And it's wonderful that we can talk about this. I think it's something that the Urantia book actually encourages. The idea of being single-minded or single tasking is something I try and teach my clients. You talk about drinking coffee. I talk about actually making a cup of coffee mindfully, breaking down the steps into smaller tasks. And I call that overall informal practice as opposed to formal practice, which is the serious meditation practices. But in our busy world, I find most of my clients enjoy the informal because you can literally
applied it to any action like driving a car is probably one of the best examples where you can be in the present moment and really focus on what you're doing. And we know the research shows overwhelmingly that it's good for mental health and that it reduces stress, anxiety, all those things that plague us. So sorry I didn't get to hear the beginning of your presentation, but it was very good. So thank you.
Perhaps we can do it with washing our hands.
Yeah.